Hey, what's up, everybody? You're watching On the Town, and I'm your host, Tanya Cooper, and there's my co-host, Richard Adamson II. We thank you so much for joining us again this week. So we hope today that you leave inspired, motivated, and ready for a call of action. Today's guest has taught nearly 20 years at the City University of New York, 17 years at the City College of Art Black Studies Department. He is he has taught on Malcolm X, traditional African religion, Pan-Africanism, crime in urban community, and American folklore. And he's appeared on a number of talk shows that you know the name of all of them. If I say them, there's a lot. So please welcome the Professor James Small. Hello, Professor.
Good afternoon, and I'm honored, Sister Tanya and Brother Rich. Me and Rich bumped into each other at a service station convenience store.
Wow.
And he goes like, would you be on my podcast? I go like, okay, nice young man. Right. I gotta do something. He was the most courteous young man I've met in the longest time. And I said, I got to do something with him.
He's
so
the best.
Here we are.
Thank you. Yeah. Rich, tell us what we're talking about today.
Yes, listen, I'm excited about today's topic, and I first want to thank you, Professor Smalls, because I've been begging many scholars to have this conversation, and you're one of the only ones that, outside of Dr. Umar, you're one of the only ones that actually responded. But there's been a debate that's been going on for years that I think it actually hurts us, and that's the debate between whose philosophy was better or whose philosophy was right between Dr. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. And the reason why I wanted somebody with your experience, Professor Smalls, to speak on the topic, because I think it's damaging to the community that we invest in so many debates and fights instead of seeing what each of us brings to the table. And somebody like myself, coming from Generation X, who saw the beginning of the crack era, I envied the 60s, because when I saw it in the 80s, we needed a Martin Luther King, we needed a Malcolm X. We were thirsting for that, and to have a great historian like yourself to be able to speak to this problem, I think is very necessary. Are you guys able to hear me clearly?
Yes, please.
Okay. So that's why we're here, and just with that introduction, I want you to start off, Professor Smalls, with your thoughts on it, because I'm sure you've heard this debate before.
Oh, I've lived this debate. You remember when Malcolm gets assassinated, I take over as the imam of the mosque.
Right.
So most people are not aware of that, but I was the imam of the Muslim Mosque Inc. And during that period, I didn't particularly care for Dr. King's philosophy. It wasn't Dr. King's philosophy as much as it was the philosophy of the Southern theater of our struggle, right? But I came from the South. I grew up in South Carolina. So, but I had a sense you can't do, at that time, you couldn't do in the South what you could do in the North in terms of political activism. The South was a terrorist camp.
Yes.
And the terrorist was the general white population and the law enforcement. The victim of that terrorism was the Black population, period. In the North, we had more space and more room to do overt agitation that you couldn't do in the South. So you had to approach it a certain way. The South was a predominantly Protestant Christian community. The North was a very integrated community. You had the Christians, the Catholic, the Muslims, the various denominations in the Black community. It wasn't dominated by the Southern Christian. That's why they call that portion the Bible Belt. You were working in different kinds of environment, and Black people were responding to different kinds of stimulus. The Black Christian in the South would not particularly have followed a Muslim movement that came out of the Midwest or the North, even though they had small Muslim communities there. But the Black community in the South would respond to a Christian Protestant leadership. And that's what Dr. King
Right.
and his SCC represented. So
Right.
again, what he called passive resistance, or what got to be called nonviolence. But when we were growing, I got to meet Dr. King once, just like I got to meet Malcom once. They were extraordinary young men. And we have to remember that much of their work was done in their late 20s, early 30s. They were both dead by age 39, assassinated. But these are youngsters that's doing this extraordinary work. And when we look at it today, it's even more extraordinary to see what they were able to do at that young. And so I think what our people misunderstand, or the misunderstanding, because they don't know the history.
Right.
If you understand the history of the African American community, and then the history of the African American struggle, you'll see the different methodologies to struggle throughout our history. During the enslavement process, there was one kind of struggle of escapism that was necessary to escape from slavery down south. And there were even free Black people in the South doing slavery. You know, Mississippi had nearly 200,000 free Black men and women. But they still had to live under conditions that was pretty close to slavery on the plantation. But in the North, where you had a larger free Black population, they had the freedom to move, to own property, and to do things that the free Black population in the South did not have, because they had no sanctuary.
Right.
The terrorists, which were primarily the law enforcers and the judiciary. Whereas in the North, you could get the law enforcement and judiciary to give you some sanctuary in terms of law enforcement in your favor. And so you can do different things and do more things. And that's really still true today. I cannot do in Texas today in terms of protests what I can do in New York in terms of protests.
And you're right about
the protection and the sanctuary in Texas that I have in New York. And I don't have the density of population to protect me that I have in New York. Right. You know, the people in the rural area, you're scattered all over the place. The people in the urban area, you're together. So it's easier to react emotionally in protection of one another. Whereas by the time someone heard that someone is lynched, their house has been burnt, they feel it's been burnt, it may take a day to have to react to those kinds of things. So Dr. King was operating in rural, Protestant Christian, Southern Black America. And Malcom was operating in the Northeast, Midwest, Northeast, West Coast, urban Black America. So you had pretty much a rural struggle and an urban struggle. And the methodology was different. The religious, people have always, in America especially, had religions as the primary organizing instrument, because that was the only sanctuary they were allowed. You were allowed to have a church. Anything else got blown up, burnt down. Okay, and that's why you got to understand history will take care of the mystery like really quick.
Right. Yeah. So, and you
and
know, I'm gonna.
When you listen, let me just go a little further on that. When you listen to what the two men are saying, they're saying pretty much the same thing. We want our people the right to self-determination. We want the right to vote. We want the right to control our own community. We want the right to control our own economy. We want the right to educate our children. They're saying almost exactly the same thing. The approach that had to be taken against the forces that was against them was different because of the social ecology, political ecology, economic ecology that they would find themselves in.
Right. And, you know, I'm glad that you spoke to that, because one of the things that I think people misunderstood about Martin Luther King and his nonviolent approach, I don't think they understood the foundation of that philosophy. A lot of people don't realize how much violence people in the South saw and was exposed to. A lot of people know about Mississippi, but my grandfather and grandmother, my grandmother who was a preacher, they were pretty much forced out of Camden, South Carolina, because they were children of sharecroppers. And the way my family,
I didn't live far from Camden. I know Camden very well.
Oh, okay. So then you know what I'm talking about. My great grandparents were Yeah, my great grandparents were sharecroppers, and what happened was my great grandmother got sick, so she couldn't really work anymore. So the man who owned the land basically had some people with him and tried to bust the door down. And my grandfather protected his mother. He broke the handle off of a pickaxe, and he seriously hurt one of the men. That's how he got the name Pick Handle Slim. And his name was James as well. But when he got to New York, he started drinking from the trauma. And so that's how I learned about the trauma that Black people faced in the South. And so they would have gotten, Martin Luther King would have gotten so much backlash had he led a violent protest and a bunch of people were killed.
Yeah, but let's be clear now. Even though he said the movement was nonviolent, it wasn't until just before Alabama that he stopped carrying a gun himself.
Right.
And throughout their history, they were protected by Black men with guns called deacons for the defense. They never put their guns down. What he was saying that our protests will not be one of violence, meaning that we can't beat them in that game of violence, especially in the South. In the North, you're in a dense urban ecology. There's certain things you can do and get away with it, which you cannot do in a rural South. You're outgunned, you're outmanned, you're outlawed. And so they understood that. But I want our people around the world to understand they weren't stupid enough to go around unprotected. And that's why he lived as long as he did. Because they would have killed him years earlier. You know, they were able to backshoot Medgar and kill him because he wasn't protected. You know, Dr. King, there was a force called Deacons for the Defense. With very little is said about those men, but they're the ones that protected those marchers. You know? And the priests never focused on them because they wasn't going to focus on no Black folks with guns. It wasn't until I think, you remember there was a period when Eisenhower, just before he left office, had to send the troops to Arkansas. Yes. Because an armed Black community responded to the abuse of the children trying to integrate their school. Now, not much was said about that response, but he sent in the National Guard to protect white people, not Black people. You know? But nobody talks about why did he send in the National Guard, right? Because Black folks have said enough is enough. Y'all want to go there? We'll go there. Right. But as Christians, you remember these people are Christians. This is a theological, this is a religious philosophy. Their Christian belief said you approach things this way. Your Christ was about being passive in this way. So they were not pretending. These are people who went to church every Sunday. You know, your people from the South. I grew up in the South on a plantation. We went to church every day. There was either prayer meeting, choir meeting, some kind of meeting, but except for maybe Saturday. But the rest of the time, we went to church for at least an hour a day during the week. And then Sunday, you had big throwdown, you know? Because that was your sanctuary. That was your safe place to express yourself as an African man or woman.
Yes. Well, I was going to ask about that. Can you just speak to that little piece? Because I often wonder, like, religion, how it's, how do I say, programmed us in some sense. And it is good for some people because that's all they have, and I get it. So it served a purpose, but it was used and given to us, I think, obviously to control us and keep us, you know, thinking like, oh, I can't do that because the Lord wouldn't want me to do this, or I'm gonna get to heaven one day when I'm gonna get my gold in heaven. So that whole theory, I think, was put upon us
But I think that's been very over exaggerated. That I used to do it when I was young too. That was very over exaggerated because most of us, the overwhelming majority of African Americans, the Africans in America, didn't become Christian until after the Civil War.
Okay.
When we were on those plantations and in those bushes and in those swamps and working those fields, we were still using hoodoo. We called it hoodoo. Others call it voodoo. Others call it Yoruba. We were still using our traditional religion. They didn't want us to become Christians because part of becoming Christians meaning you have to learn how to read. They didn't want us to learn how to read. And yes, there were some plantations, because I grew up on one that was in a cluster of 7.
Mhm.
And they were those who felt we can better organize people if we give them that to do on Sunday instead of them doing ring shout. But how many people ever hear about ring shout? You know,
Mhm.
our tradition that we did, especially in South Carolina, on Sundays, it was much of the tradition we practiced, because South Carolina people, the base of our population came from Congo, Angola. Contrary to what people think, we were not a West African people. That's why you don't see a Yoruba type of phenomena that you see in Brazil and Latin America, because we were people from Congo, Cameroon, Angola. That was the base population. Near the end of slavery, we had then the Akans and the Yoruba, and then the Mendi coming out of the Sierra Leone area. But
Mhm.
my grandmother was what you call a root lady, an indigenous priestess. Every single village, I'm talking for hundreds of miles, had a root man and a root lady. That means an indigenous African priest. They still have them. Okay.
Mhm.
But when I was growing up, this was all we had. No, we couldn't afford a doctor or a hospital.
Mhm.
You
Right.
had to come to Mama. You had to come to Miss Pigeon. You had to come to the
Mhm.
root lady. All right. Or go to Dr. Buzzard, who was the chief root man in South Carolina. Everybody knew Dr. Buzzard. Even the white people went to him. And so we maintained the culture. It's only been in the 20th century, the latter part of the 20th century, that we've seen the diminishing of the culture, because we haven't done the research necessary to do the writing to talk about those experiences of the generation, my generation and the one before me, who did so much retention. But coming back to the church part, to a great degree, especially in urban North, the church was used in that way.
Mhm.
But in the South, they were really afraid to give us the church until after the Civil War.
Mhm.
And we flipped it on them, because if you look, that's why I refer to it as a sanctuary, because that place we can go hide and do black things. So
Mhm.
after the Civil War, out of the church comes thousands of schools. Every black church had a school that we built for ourselves. Nobody built it for us. Maybe in a few cases, some white folks, benevolent folks donated something. But these thousands of schools, here's a non-reading, non-literate slave population. But within 10, 20 years, you got hundreds of schools. Between 1865 and 1939, when the stock market crashed, we have thousands of schools. We have over 70 banks. We have over 75, 80 insurance companies. You do that because you have access to your struggle, but we hid it in the church. That's why if you went into a white church, a white Baptist church, you'll see one kind of thing going on. You go into a black Baptist church, there's another thing going on. One is there's an African thing and there's a European thing. But because the umbrella is a European thing to a degree, we think that's what's going on in the black church. Now, today, since the 1960s, the black church have become more white than it's ever been in its history. But up to the late 60s, the black church was an African sanctuary. And that's why they had the Tulsa wasn't the only black Wall Street. We had them in almost every state in America. But most of them was burned to the ground, attacked by authorities, and people killed, from Florida to North Carolina to Texas. And so that's why history will erase so much of the mystery. If we study the history of these people, especially from 1860 to now, because nearly, they will say 4,000 or 400,000 of us fought in the Civil War. Those were the ones in uniform. Another 400,000 who didn't have no uniform on, who was spying behind the land, sabotaging, burning the fields, burning the cotton. Nearly 1 million of us fought in that war. We freed our darn selves. We were not freed by them. I thank the young white men. Nearly 1 million of them lost their lives, and I give them credit. Some was fighting to save the Union, but some indeed was fighting to stop slavery, and you can't take that away from them. And so I give them that respect. But nearly 1 million of us fought in that war, and we don't get full credit for it. They'll name one or two people who fought. But coming back to the church, remember the church begins in Africa.
Yes.
Romans take it into Europe, and then European acculturize it, and then the Germanics, the British and the West and the French and others, they take it and European culturize it further, then impose the European culturalization of Christianity on us here in the Americas and the Caribbean. And so what our people did, they recognized the components of it, but they knew they couldn't change it overtly because they were living in a terrorist state. We still live in a terrorist state, but then it was extraordinarily overt. And so they took that church and was able to go into it and recreate themselves as African peoples to the degree they could, given the fact that we lived in the United States of America. We didn't even know how to get back to Africa, you know?
Right.
Well, you know, I saw a thing on somebody's post once where they showed a picture of that the hat that the pontiff or the pope wears is actually from African, not deity, what do you call it? An African.
From Kemet. It's the crown of the pharaohs.
Yes, yes.
And
a lot of it.
Yeah, most of his regalia is straight out of Egypt.
Right. That's
crazy. But if you study the history, the Ethiopian church is 500 years older than the Catholic Church. You know, people don't think 500 years older than the Catholic Church, 1,000 years older than Luther's Reformation that created the Protestant Church. So then you have to ask the question, whose church is it? But once they take our product and you culturalize it as a European phenomenon, that's what we ended up receiving in the Caribbean and Africa and North America during slavery. The acculturalization and the European motif of an African understanding of cosmology and ecology. Because all those symbols we were using, the Christ, the this, the that, we were explaining the cosmology and the ecology to ourselves. So we use anthropomorphic representation, use humans and animals and plants and birds to explain nature in a way that it was comprehensible to a population that was 90-some% illiterate. How are you going to tell them something to an illiterate person they can't read? So you need symbols out of the environment that represents phenomena, function, qualities, and attributes to tell the story. And that's where the birds come in and the animals come in and even the men come in and the women. You're telling a story about how the universe works and how it affects you. And how you should behave in order to positively integrate and affect it. That's what religion is about. But somebody else don't understand that, and they come and say, "Oh, that man there with the beard is God." No, that's not what we were saying. We were saying the essence of God is in all living beings, and the man is just symbolic as a caricature of how one should conduct themselves. You know, in order to accentuate the essence of the divine within. But if the population sees all of this and not literate to your culture, they'll do what the Europeans did with Christianity, turn it into a worship of men. You know? And so
you're right, because even, you know, I was telling a brother, and this is why I'm glad we're having this conversation, because, you know, when I see people saying, well, Martin Luther King's way versus Malcolm X and the church versus the mosque, it makes me think of Willie Lynch to keep us fighting over something. So that
I don't think anyone else is keeping us fighting. Our ignorance has got us fighting. Because if we read Dr. King's speech, some of those speeches are more militant than Malcolm's.
Yes,
some of them are more nationalistic than Malcolm's. But most people have never really read that man's book. They've never read his speech. There's one speech he wrote back in 57. When did Ghana get free? 57?
I want to say.
57. And he's there in Ghana. 57. Dr. Martin Luther King is with Nkrumah in 57, celebrating the independence of Ghana. Him and Ralph Bunche and a bunch of other Black Americans. And when he comes back home, he writes a speech, which everyone who's listening, go online and look up Dr. King's speech. It's called The Birth of a New Nation. You swear Malcolm X penned it. You know what I'm saying? Malcolm X was doing then. The birth of a new nation.
Is that the I mean, because I didn't hear it in its entirety, but is that one of the reasons perhaps that he was assassinated, along with, we know why, but is that another reason? Because I had heard he had a little shift in his thinking, but he hadn't really come out with that in public.
No, I don't think Dr. King had a shift at all. The media likes to say that. Dr. King was for freedom of African people, but the word in America wasn't African then. The word for African people in America was Negro, the Spanish word for black. White Anglo-Saxon couldn't say negrito, so they came up with negra and nigger and negro, but it meant black, because the Spanish and the Portuguese dominated this hemisphere, and their word for African people was negrito. And so that's where the word Negro comes. When somebody sit down and I'm going to come up with a profane word for black folks, that's some of the miseducation. It gets to be used in a profane way, but they used to use, when I was a child, no one wanted to be called African because the word Africa was used in a profane way. No one wanted to be called black because black was used in a profane way. We just got to the point and said, the hell with it. We're going to own what's ours. Right. And once we owned it, that profanity went away. He didn't, what he did, I think more than anything in terms of strategy, right? Malcolm in the Northern group did not have a universal strategy for the Northern problems. They had local strategies. Dr. King in the Southern group had a strategy for the entire Southern struggle. Remember, they're not all over the country. They're dealing primarily in about 15 states in the South. And that 15 states is culturally united because African Americans are not a universal people. We have multicultural African American communities. This is a big place. And our culture varies depending on geography and the political conditions and stuff we had to evolve under. So they're in the South and they're trying to figure out, how do we fight and survive? One of the things we know, our people ain't going nowhere because we don't have the means to go anywhere. So how do we live here? We've got to get the control of the politics where we live. How do we get control of the politics where we live? We have to have the right to vote so we can determine who the politicians are. But how do we get the right to vote? Because they're denying that. Then we've got to demonstrate in the street. How do we demonstrate without getting the backlash in such a terrible way? Because we've seen it all through our history that we can't be. So one of his strategy was to behave at a passive level, forcing the white to behave at a violent level so the whole world can see. Remember, we coming from television, right? During that period of the late 40s, early 50s. And Dr. King's strategy was, let's expose America to the world. And they had the ally of the Jewish and the what do you call it, the liberal Anglo community who was controlling media. They were looking to get the black population, who in 1933 had shifted from being predominantly Republican to shift completely over to being Democrats. So that this was a big part of it. So their thing was, we're going to help the black population in the civil right, get the right to vote thing, because then they're going to vote for us as Democrats, and we can get control of the federal government of the United States. That was a big part of it. All right. And so we accept that. That's cool. That may be y'all's motive, but our motive is we want to be free. So if that's what it's going to take, then this is what we're going to do. And usually when we have this discussion, talks about what was the role of the white media and the white liberals in their support of our struggle in the South. And that role was, those same people didn't support us in the North now because we had the right to vote. And we had already made the shift by the time Franklin Delano Roosevelt had come in with his New Deal from Republican, where Abe Lincoln was, to Democrats. But now the Democrats wanted to dominate the arena. And that was why they put support behind us. And the big support was using the media to expose white government terrorism against the people who simply want to vote. And that worked. And Dr. King's job was to antagonize these people enough so they attack us.
Yes.
And the fools did.
Yes, because
that's what happened.
Yes, the Passage of the Civil Rights Act, right? 1960. 1964. I think it was the year before I won. Yeah, voting. Yeah,
and it worked, and it worked very well. But when Dr. King, by the time they get to 1968, and he's challenging them in the war in Vietnam, this is based on his being a Christian theologian and minister. So how can he not object to the genocide in Vietnam? That angered them, right? Because that was the point where they get ready to make their big thrust.
Right.
Okay? Johnson had just come in the office. Kennedy had just been killed, and Johnson wanted, came in. Kennedy was trying to stop the war. That's part of why he was killed. Johnson comes in, and he's working for the military-industrial complex. He wants to escalate the war. But Vietnam isn't about communism. Vietnam is about oil. Vietnam is about rice. People think of rice and go, what do you mean Vietnam is about rice? Do you know rice is almost as big as oil? Do you know everybody in the world eats rice?
Yes.
Guess who the biggest rice producer in the world is? One would think some Asian country. Right now, it's the United States of America.
Wow, that explains it.
Rice. But we don't think of that because that's not pushed up there. But Vietnam also had a lot of oil off of the coast. They wanted to get control of that petroleum. And so they played the communist game. Of course, they got their butts whipped, but still at the end of the day, they were able to cut deals and get in there. But Dr. King stepped in there and was messing that whole thing up because America wanted to be the one to hold up the mantle and say, we are the free world leader, against communism. And Dr. King stepped in and goes like, yo, that ain't what you doing there. You're killing innocent women and children. You know, you're illegally in another people's nation. You're stopping them from having their democracy and self-determination. Because Ho Chi Minh wanted America as his primary ally, right? He did not want to side with China and Russia. Ho Chi Minh even spent time living in Harlem, all right? He met Malcolm X. Ho Chi Minh wanted to use the Declaration of Independence of America as their primary document. And America said no, because America wanted their land and wanted their oil and other minerals that the French had lost. America said, we're going to go in and steal it, because the Battle of Algeria forced the French to move its troops out of Vietnam, and the Viet Minh was able to whip their booties. So America, instead of coming, and this is why Charles de Gaulle went to his grave not being a friend with America, because America stole Vietnam from France. And then the Vietnamese whipped their butts and ran them out. So all of this dynamic is going on at the same time. And Dr. King steps right in the middle of that and talks about the immorality of the war. And the imposition of poverty in America exists while you're spending money to kill other innocent people who are just trying to be free. But what really got them, and people don't talk about it much, is when he began his economic movement.
Yes, that's the one.
That's what I was going to ask you about.
And they decided this man's got to die, because he didn't stop at the borders of Black America. He went into white Appalachia with the poorest whites in this country and said, listen, you're suffering just like me. You on the welfare bigger than me. You get you're getting all these other things that you're saying I'm doing, but you're living way below the poverty line. And guess what? A lot of the white folks go like, you're right. We marching with y'all. And that's when the big boys look at this. That's going a step too far. Because he had talked about it in the speech that they call, the March on Washington speech. He spoke about this thing there, but he began to carry it out in 67, 68. And that's what killed him.
That's what I heard.
And and I wanted to ask you that, Professor Smalls, would you say that, because I really learned a lot about the economic side, or if you will, of Martin Luther King's strategy, would you say that there was some Garveyism in him, or some influence from Marcus Garvey in Martin Luther King?
No, I don't like to say that, because Garvey had no more influence than the preacher down the street. See,
Gotcha.
we create demagogues for ourselves and try to make them live. Garvey was an extraordinary leader. But Garvey said when he came to America, I'm here to implement the Tuskegee model of Booker T. Washington, but we never called Booker T. Washington's name, because the white press said Booker T. was the boogeyman, right? Yet him and Garvey was the best of friends and brothers, and Booker and Garvey was to team up, but they killed Booker before Garvey could get here.
Oh,
You know, if you ask the average person, how did Mr. Booker T. Washington die? I bet neither of you can tell me how he died.
No, I can't tell you.
The average Black American don't have a clue how he died or where he died. He died on a train on the way back to Tuskegee when it pulled into the station in Baltimore because he had been poisoned at a meeting in New York.
Wow.
And he was in St. Luke's Hospital when he realized, I'm going to die. He sent a telegram to his wife and his aide to come and get him. And they were trying to take him back to Tuskegee, hoping they could save him. But he died when the train pulled into Baltimore. And Garvey had already, because Mr. Garvey was supposed to come. Initially, Garvey wanted to come and teach at Tuskegee with him. And he told him, no, you can't bring that philosophy down in the South. That ain't gonna work. You got to go to the Northeast. But we're going to work together, right?
Yeah.
And the brother who talks about this well, my good friend and good ancestral brother that I love so much, Dr. Tony Martin. And Tony's writing. Tony probably wrote more about the Honorable Marcus Garvey. So when you see Dr. King, yes, you do see Marcus Garvey in him. But don't begin it with Marcus, because Marcus is getting it from somewhere and Booker is getting it from somewhere. What you see is Pan-Africanism. What you see is Africanism. What you see is self-determination. And then you see that in all of them. You see that in the Honorable Marcus Garvey. He didn't invent none of those things. You see it in Booker. He didn't invent none of those. You see this in Drew Ali. You see it in Elijah Muhammad and other men and women before them. And what you see, what's so beautiful about what you see in Garvey, nobody ever stops and says, how did he able to build this thing so fast, so quick after he came to North America? He couldn't build it in Jamaica.
Right.
He couldn't build it anywhere in the Caribbean. He could build it in North America because there was a network already in place. Mr. Booker put that network in place, and the AME Church put it in place. Because there was a woman who was Garvey's partner. Everybody talked about his wives who were beautiful women. They were not his political partner in the movement to that degree.
Right.
The person was Henrietta Benton Davis. Now look her up.
Yes.
Henrietta Benton Davis, a protege of Frederick Douglass, who was an actress and a school teacher from Washington, D.C. When Garvey went to prison, that's who he left in charge of the UNIA. Now the brothers tried to kick the sister out. The brothers ain't never treated sisters right in this movement, even to today. They're trying to kick the sister out, but they wasn't able to do it.
Right.
This lady was a foundation of the AME Church. And the AME Church, remember what Garvey did before he really jumped out there? He went all around America. He visited every state, every Black community in America. And the network he used for that was the AME Church.
The church.
So you got to back up all those things in. The AME Church. Okay?
Right.
And the other piece that we don't pay attention to is the Freemasons, Prince Hall Freemasons. The network is already in place. And this is a network you can use to organize. So by the time the UNIA is put together, the men and women that make up the UNIA come from these networks. The Booker T. Washington Network, the AME Church Network, the Baptist Church Network. Then the Baptist Church was called the African Baptist Church. Founded in 1749, even before the AME Church. It was founded in Savannah, Georgia. So that history erased a lot of mystery and make you look back and say, oh, wow. Now the picture makes sense. I understand why he's doing this. I understand why he's doing this. And that lady, Henrietta Benton Davis, when the Honorable Messiah Marcus Garvey launched the Black Star Line, guess who was on board that ship on this major voyage? That lady.
That lady.
But the terrorists in Florida stopped the ship in Jacksonville, quarantined it, and wouldn't let it continue to the Caribbean, where its destination was. Held it under guard in the port until they ran out of food and water. Of course, the people got mad with Garvey and Henrietta and them when they left the ship. Instead of the U.S. government, who quarantined them, saying that some Black guys had escaped from the chain gang, and they were scared they were going to get on the ship and go to the Caribbean and be free. That just flied in the face of common sense. But these are the things that history will tell you that these terrorists have used against us. And then you can see Garvey and the others as even greater heroes than we see them. Because every day of their lives was one more day that they might not make it tonight.
Yes.
In America at that time. And yet they kept going forward. They acted like nothing happened. like we're going to build this store. We're going to build this doll factory. We're going to build this clothing store. We're going to open these beauty shops. Because everywhere they went, they built business.
Right.
Yes.
That was the key, building Black business. And Garvey was very good at that. And we don't talk about that much. But everywhere there was a UNIA chapter, there were Black businesses being built. Now, the Nation of Islam under Elijah Muhammad would follow that model until his son took over and destroyed the model. But that's where the model came from, because Elijah Muhammad comes out of the UNIA under Garvey's teaching. So you put it all together so you can see the whole picture. And they're not disconnected, they're actually interconnected. It's just that they move through different time sequence. You know, like you're X. I wouldn't call you Generation X, but y'all call it X. I don't know what generation they call me. I guess I'm called, what they call that? 1945. The war, baby.
I call y'all the civil rights generation, because
but one of the greatest keys to freedom is to study our history, learn the history, learn the details of history that will tell the story. Our people have been some of the most courageous people in the world. We could have wiped out the white race in America. We cooked the damn foods, but that's not how our humanity is organized.
Okay. Right.
Well, that's allow us to commit genocide.
Yes, but what you say, history will solve the mystery. I think that's what you said earlier. That's why it's hit. But I think that's why it's hidden, and that's why it was hidden and rewritten. And we're just waking up. Some people knew. Like, some people were way on it. I think, like my adopted mom and her side, all that group kind of, I don't know how they knew, maybe because they had just got grandparents who were off a plantation. I'm not sure how they knew, but it's a different time in the 50s and 60s. Organization, Malcolm X, Dr. King. It's a whole different mindset. Like you said, they had businesses. They're like, okay, people are hungry in the neighborhood. We're going to organize a food drive. People need jobs. Okay, we're going to make jobs over here. Bring the young people to work. I mean, they had this whole thing going on. And today, it appears there's a major disconnect. Ain't nobody willing to die for us at all. That's number one. And
no,
number
don't say nobody. A few of us are still here.
Well, excuse me. Absolutely correct.
Look at you. You're there. Rich is there.
Absolutely correct. I'm sorry. My apologies to anyone who is fighting the real struggle. But you know what I mean, that it's, I see people, dally-lagging, as I say, and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. But I'm like, then why are those kids still over there shooting each other? Because they don't have anything to do. They don't have any opportunity. They don't have any chance. They don't have any, not that that's an excuse. It's never an excuse. It's just, what do you expect? I mean, what would you expect someone to be if they have nothing? Like, what, I mean, did you think they were going to be?
We got to remember, we're at war. The war has never stopped from the time the first ship came to the shores of Africa.
Yes.
And drugs was a warfare carried on by the governments, the United States government being at the center of it, but the British and French government and others also used narcotics against our population in their urban centers. America was in the lead of that. Crack was something that the American government distributed to our community.
Yes.
And by combining the warfare with controlling a negative educational model for the socialization of our kids, caused great damage for between, say, 1965 and 2005.
Yes.
It was they didn't just sit back and say, oh, they want to be free, let them be free. No, they came up with new ways to control our minds. The music, when hip hop started out, it started out as a protest music. It was a celebration. Remember, hip hop rises in the early 70s. After the death of Dr. King, the death of Malcolm X, the crushing of the Black Panther Party, the crushing of the Black Liberation Army. Out of that dust rise of protest music from urban America that didn't even require technology. You didn't even need a microphone, really. You didn't need a musical instrument.
Right.
And then they realized, first they laughed at it. Then when they realized not only are the youngsters reaching other youngsters, they're making money. And so they came in with their billions and their millions and their slick drive and bought this one off and bought this one off and used their radios and their television to promote this one and promote this one, and really created that genre that got to be known as gangster rap, where they taught our children to do all of the things that would get them killed or get them thrown in jail.
Yes. Promoting, literally.
So that whole high school to prison pipeline thing, which was a controlled process, controlled by corporate America and the American government and its intelligence network. So we cannot leave them out as a factor in what's happening to our people. And then many of the church that was in the lead of the political movement got bought out for the most part. All of a sudden now they can build a nursing home. Government will pay 75 cents. You can build a senior home. We're going to pay 75%. You need some buses for the church, but you keep your mouth shut politically.
Exactly. And that's what I was going to say.
And we saw that under Bush. Bush codified that into law. Despite the separation church-state bull that they run. And so all of those things must be factored in so we can understand. But to give hip-hop also the credit, despite that assault on that cultural presentation, hip-hop isn't a culture unto itself. It's an aspect of the African world culture that simply had its genesis in America via Jamaican cultural talents. And so this is really a Pan-African cultural phenomena that is responding to something, and is responding to the fact that you've killed our leaders in the last decade, you've destroyed our militant organizations, you've put our people in prison, you vilify us on the television. So we're going to find a passive way to speak to the people who are impoverished, who are living in ghettos. And at first, like I said, they didn't think that would be effective. And when they realized the young people are listening to that, they moved in with every bit of technology, law enforcement, and monies, and subvert the movement into a destructive moment in time.
Yeah, but one thing about that is what I say, oh, the universe is watching you when you try to do dirt, is that what they forgot, and Rich, you can attest to this, is drugs do not discriminate.
Right.
So you might think you hit me.
Home to roots, and we're seeing it right now.
Exactly.
America right now, the American white youth is almost 75% addicted, if not more. I'm being liberal. I mean, it's so serious. They've outlawed drugs as being illegal now. You can't make it illegal because your whole youth population is a mess.
Yeah, you know what?
Touching everyone.
To speak to that, Professor Smalls, what I do for a living, I'm a human service professional. One of my areas, one of my specialties is substance abuse counseling. And I remember when they started to put on the news, like, hey, you know, the heroin and opioid crisis in upstate New York. And I was like, this been going on. Like everybody, you know, but I saw it because I was in the field. You know what I'm saying? I saw the universal effect, but I also saw it in the music world too, because I did music for a while. You know, I'm a percussionist and I did hip hop. I was going to send you one of my conscious songs that I did a while ago before I actually got into the ministry. But I saw that impact that drugs had, especially growing up in the 80s.
And they used it all throughout history. Remember music. Music is one of the most powerful instruments that a culture can produce, because music opens up your consciousness to receive things, to receive information. So if you go back to Billie Holiday, who's feeding Billie Holiday the drugs? You go back to John Coltrane, who's feeding Coltrane the drugs? And because they understand that I can't allow, we know it's going to happen. But how do we let it happen where we control how it happens? And drugs is one of the main ways. But by the time you get Bill Clinton down in Alabama as the governor, and you got George Bush, the former CIA drug dealer, as the president, and then you get Oliver North, a colonel in the army, and General Seco, General whatever his name was, running the drugs into the National Guard base in Arkansas, so that they can get money from our community to buy weapons to try and overthrow the Sandinistas by creating the Contras, and at the same time buying those weapons from Iran. At the same time, Iran is holding the American hostage. These are some sick people. That's why you gotta understand this history. Go like, these are some really sick people, right? And all of this stuff, we're at the middle of it because we've got surplus capital, but we don't have an organization strategy for unity. So that surplus capital, a lot of it went to drugs. Last year, the African Americans spent $1.7 trillion. There's only 11 nations in the world that's got that much money. Do you hear me? There's not a single African nation or Caribbean nation that has $1.7 trillion of surplus money to spend. Yes, the African American population have that money to spend, but the African American population don't have an African Unity Foundation, don't have an African Economic Unity Foundation, or an African Political Foundation, or an African Culture Foundation to inform them and instruct them on how to use that wealth.
Right.
You know,
I'm sorry, Tanya, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was going to say, is there anyone working on that, or can that be
people
a thing?
Working on it, but remember, we're big people. They admit that we are 60 million. We're probably 80 million people. You know what 80 million Black people look like in a country they don't control? And America's a big place. It's not a little country. We scattered all over this country in multiple Black cultural communities, because you can split the South into 3 different cultural genders. Then you got the West Coast. Then you got the far West up in the Colorado and that area. That's a whole different Black person. They probably don't even recognize me and you. Then you got the Midwest Black folks, the industrial belt. Then you got the Northeastern Black folks. You know, and there's at least 7 distinct Black cultural communities in America, with nearly 80 million people trying to pretend that we're a part of America that rejects us at every corner.
Yes.
Right.
You know?
Do you think there's been progress?
Oh, yeah. I mean, progress is happening. People are fighting every day. There's different organizations, different movements, reparations, unity coming, people uniting around trying to get the vote out, people uniting around trying to get the right person run for office. But we're up against the mightiest nation on the planet Earth ever.
That's what I was going to say.
We have to remember what we're up against. Here, these people have over, and I said I wouldn't mention this, but I got to mention it at least once. This nation is overtly supporting the genocide, the outward genocide of over 5,000 women and children in Palestine. And the government ain't got nothing negative to say about it.
Nothing. I mean, everything they say is like an excuse.
So what do you think they think of us? The same thing they think of those babies in Palestine, that's what they think of us here in America. If not worse, because we can agitate them, right?
Well, they fed our babies to alligators, so I don't expect much.
And they're still doing it. They're selling them to technical alligators now and psychological alligators, because here we're in America, in the school system, majority of the school system do not teach our history. And where they do teach aspect of our history, they don't teach about the continent of Africa before slavery.
Right, because you know what? And I realized that when I was young, because when I found out that, first of all, Christopher Columbus ain't even make it here to America.
He never touched the North America.
He never touched here. But the other thing I wanted to say, one of the things that I'm doing and that Tanya is helping me do is bring us together in a way, which why I'm so glad that you were able to come and teach us, Professor Smalls. I'm thankful that you're teaching us and correcting us where we were wrong, because we need that help. Because what I see today, like you said, our ignorance has us fighting each other.
Yes.
And one of the nightmares that I lived coming up, I met a lot of people from the 60s era, including my dad and everybody. Then when I looked at my generation, it was like we were taught through this gangster rap stuff and these, shoot 'em up movies that if you're not from my neighborhood, I'm looking at you funny and I may do something to you. And it was a culture shock for me, because I was taught by people like yourself who lived through terrorism to set us free. And I was just talking to my oldest daughter the other day. She's about to get her degree, associate's degree. And I was letting her know about the history of my grandfather, my grandmother, and
who was your grandfather first? Did you know Baba Ahmed Obafemi?
I'm not sure if I knew him by that name. Ahmed, you talking about from New Rochelle? Ahmed
from New Rochelle,
of course.
His sons managed,
of course, Brand Nubian,
right?
And of course, we are very heavily connected to Ahmed and the Dixon
Well, that's
family.
because I hear his spirit in you. Me and Ahmed go back to when we were in our 20s. You know, now I'm almost 80, and he's gone to the ancestors. But we worked together in the very early parts of our life, fighting this brainwashing because we saw it. You know, they were using the media, they were using music, they were using the school system because they were. And then I'm coming. Did you say you were in the ministry? That's what I want to get to. Are you in the ministry?
Yes, I did jail ministry.
What is your denominational base?
We don't really believe in denomination, but they call us apostolics.
Okay, so you have to, whether you believe in it or not, it exists, and people visualize it and they see it. Right. What I try to tell folks is look at the history of the unity of Christianity, because they're divided up in so many different pieces. The Baptist church over here, the Methodist church over there, the Apostolic church over there, the Seventh-day Adventist, and everybody worshiping the same Christ. Let's have a conversation. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. Oh yeah, I would love that.
At that level, you could begin to have a conversation. If you read the Quran, Christ is all through the Quran. Let's have a conversation. We're not having the right conversation. What we're doing, we're responding to other people's cultural cocoons that's around the religion instead of the essence of what the religion itself is saying. Because all are saying the same thing. Love one another, be kind to one another, love the divine, learn to be ethical, moral, and principally right. All of them are saying the same thing. But the cultural cocoons that people have built around them saying something else. And that blocks us. So for the young brothers and sisters I meet in the ministry, I fought hard against Christianity, and then I fought hard against Christianity and Islam, because ain't none of y'all been our friends. But then okay, that's where our people are at. So what are we going to do? Leave them all out there to die? That means 99% of black folks going to die then.
Right.
But if that's who we've come to enlighten and save, then we have to figure a way to get them to understand the teachings of the religions they say they are part of. Because every one of them at its core is revolutionary. You know, Christ, we like to play with it. I'll just give you a little piece. So all my good Christian friends, hear me well, right? When he comes into that temple on Friday, he literally kicks ass, right? Turns over tables. That would be akin to you and I going on Wall Street and busting up a bunch of computers, you know what I'm saying? And pull people out of the Wall Street floor. That's what Christ does in entering this temple and throwing the money changers out. But it's not taught to us that way. It's not brought to the reality. And I'll go further. At the end of the day, they go out to the Garden of Gethsemane. They're kind of wiping the sweat because they just got away from the Romans, and the Romans show up there. And what does Peter do? He does not pull out a butter knife. He pulls out a sword and takes the dude's ears off. Plan. Teach the truth, right? Christ has to say, yo, put the sword down.
Yes.
Then he tells Mark to take the money from the treasury and go buy as many swords as they can. Because they understood they were at war with the Romans. The Romans were killing their people. So they created this one-dimensional Christ for us. And then we jump on the one-dimensional Christ that looks like our enemy. Yet the book says you're made in the image of God. So the Chinese God shouldn't look African. The Chinese God should look Chinese. But the African God's supposed to look African. You don't see you worshiping no blackface gods. You know, so we got to come back to some common sense and we let the Bible inform you. Then I'll mess with you a little bit, make you do some research. There was a man named Barabbas, right? Right after that incident in the temple, where Christ breaks up everything, where he goes Malcom on him. He went from Dr. King to Malcolm, right? And so he gets away, but Barabbas gets arrested. Now, have you ever studied Hebrew to find out what the word bar means in Hebrew?
No.
It means son of. You know what the word Rabbis is? It's the root word for Rabbi, meaning Lord. Barabbas was the son of the Lord. He gets captured, and Mary Magdalene tell her husband, "You better get your behind down in prison. Get my boy out. I don't care how you do it. Don't care how you pull it off, but you better go do it." So he called his boy Judas in and said, "Look, go make a prisoner swap arrangement for me, and we're going to pretend we done bought you out." And then he told Paul and the rest, "Let's get ready for how this thing going to go down." And then he escapes from the cross. and tell all the good Christians in the world to listen to Brother Small well, because he didn't tell Thomas to put your hand through a mythical hole. He gave him a real hand to put his hand through the hole. While he's on that cross, he only has 2 hours. Normally, you got to be on the cross 3 days to die. Then I'm going to leave the religion alone. I want to stimulate something in you to do research so you can teach these young people. He gets on that cross about 3 in the afternoon. He's got to be off by 4:30 because it's going to be sundown. That's the Sabbath. Can't kill nobody or bury nobody on the Sabbath. Right? Shabbat. So they got to get him down. So they break the other 2 dudes' leg, right? They break the 2 thieves' leg, but they don't break his leg. Because he got something to do. He got to walk away from this. Just want to make you think so you can learn from the teaching. Then brother said, "Oh, Brother Small, you got it all wrong." They stuck him in the side with the sword, with the spear. I said, "You know you're right." But the book itself said he bled blood and water. Any physician will tell you if you cut somebody and blood and water comes out, it means the brain has so slowed down its metabolism, it's not causing the heart to beat very fast to pump enough blood for him to bleed to death. That's why you will see water in the blood. You can check with your physician. And then, well, how did he get to that state? At some time period back, he said, "I thirst." Somebody gave him vinegar and gall, which was poppy juice and fermented apple juice. And the poppy just brought him right down to, "Yo, what's up, folks?" And when he gets into the scene, the sisters came and did the revision like they're supposed to do, because the sisters are the priestess. And he tells them to tell the brothers where to meet him. Now that's messing up your whole tradition. I understand that, but you know. And I'm gonna give you 2 more pieces for you to think through so you study. Because right now, if the church get it right, our people would be free tomorrow. The greatest period in our history, when we got different levels of freedom and different levels of development, is because it was led by the church. But the church was not going in the direction it's going in now. It wasn't a place to just sing and shout. People sang and shout because that's part of our culture.
Yes.
Right? The church was a place where we organized economic, politics, and culturally to go back through that door into that community and build. And we're not doing that now.
No, Professor Smalls, you absolutely hit it on the head. My adopted mom was a civil rights leader as well, and she was friends with Dr. King. And that's what I noticed that everyone did then versus now is they really utilized the church for what it really could be used for, not just like, "Oh, I'm just going to go and preach or shout, whatever." It's like, okay, we need to organize votes. Okay, sister so-and-so, you do such and such, and brother so-and-so, you do that's what it's used for. But we do not do that anymore. And I strongly believe the church has been bought out usually. And I'm not sure to what capacity, but it just seems that they're not, I don't know, it's not the same.
You know, the church in the past, the leadership was always selected from the community by the community.
Right.
Now we are hiring theologians. They're black-faced, but they've been taught in white theological institutions to come and run a church in a community they're not even a part of. And so the church has become a business now.
Exactly.
If you go,
and that's the problem.
Leonardo da Vinci painted The Last Supper, right?
Yes.
So when you look at The Last Supper, what do you see? You see a man sitting there, right? And there's light coming out of his head, right? He got this halo, but he's got light coming out of his head, right? On either side of him is 6 persons, right? The person to his immediate right is a woman, Mary Magdalene, except nobody says it. They just quietly. But she's standing with 2 other people and they're talking to each other. And then the next group is another group of 3s talking to each other. On the other side is 2 groups of 3s with each sets of 3 talking to each other. So what you're looking at is the Christ figure is symbolic of the sun. That's why the light is emanating from him. And because the sun is symbolic of the human brain, giving off the light of knowledge and understanding. And the 4 people around him, the 4 sets of 3s is the 4 seasons and the 12 months. It's a solar drama being explained in painting, which is European hieroglyph at that time, because the European population is 99% illiterate. So you're not going to read nothing to them or tell them to read. but you can paint it
Right.
for them to see.
Right.
Right.
What I'm saying, study, you've got the book. Most of what's in the Bible comes out of Africa. What's in the theology comes out of Europe. That's their culture that they wrap the teachings in. But most of the ethical, moral principles, folklore, parables, and allegory comes right up out of Africa. But you're not going to know that if you don't know African history, because you won't recognize what you're looking at.
Right.
Exactly. And that's, you know what? And that's why it was such a great honor for me to meet you, Professor Smalls, because I've listened to a lot of your lectures, and I followed you for years, and I had no idea that you knew Ahmed. You know what I'm saying?
That was my brother. We were comrades at war. We were soldiers in the trench.
Yeah, no, listen. My family, Ahmed, God rest his soul, but Ahmed can attest to the stories that I shared with you about the Adamson family, what my father went through, because he knew my father very well. My father was shot.
You probably knew your father, Yeah,
they used to call him Sleep, but he's Reverend Adamson now. But he was the guy that was shot by the police on Horton Avenue many years ago in the 70s. So there's a lot of reason why you see the energy that you see in me, and I'm one that have taken Jesus into the jails and have faced some very powerful people, because I really believe in the righteousness of Jesus. So when I met somebody like yourself, I'm a person who is a student, a lifetime student. So somebody like yourself who was there to see certain things that I was not born to witness.
Remember, Jesus is the prototype God.
Right.
If we stay clear on that why he's symbolically so important, because this is what God's supposed to look like when it lives in man or woman. If we want to know what God looks like, here's a model. Now let's try to imitate this model so that we can also look like God in character and behavior and attitude, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's what he has to move that thing. Sorry.
Go ahead, Tom.
That part of looking like what God looks like is where Dr. King, when he stood in his conviction of the nonviolence, I thought that I was wondering if the religion played a part, because to me, if you're really saying you're a Christian, then I guess you're doing Christian things. And so for him to stand in that was very, just as a youngster looking out, not really knowing anything about any of it, but just seeing that you're like a role model. So someone looks at you and you say, I'm a Christian, but yet you'll slap Mary, right? So this so then you can
Mary
like,
should have slapped the piss out of him back. She was a better Christian.
well, you know what I mean. You know what I mean.
But Christianity is not a nonviolent religion.
Right.
I mean, his nonviolence was out of common sense and necessity. You cannot use overt violence in the Southern theater.
Right. So that's what
I had at least 2 attempts on my life by white gangs and Klan in the South before I even graduated high school.
Right.
And if I didn't have a weapon on the second night when I had to spend the night in those marshes, I'd be not here.
Right. And you know what
Christianity is like, what is necessary for the sake of justice? This thing of dying in the lion's den. Those people in the lion's dens trying to fight to get the hell out of that lion's den. Saying, Lord, forgive me while I get eaten. That's not what was going on. But common sense told Doc that you cannot fight this force with that force.
Right.
You need another force. Where God came in was the capacity to persevere. Imagine being in a church in Alabama, Arkansas, Mississippi. Outside in the street is the armed policemen. Most of them are Klan, and then the Klansmen themselves with their rifles and everything, daring you to come out. And you go in that church, and you pray to God for 3-4 hours, and you sing your African rhythmic song. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around.
Turn me around.
Or I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my God and be free. And you took your spirit, you used the African music and the African rhythm, you used the scripture and the image of Christ, and you became that. And you know what you did? You opened the damn door and you walk out in the street, and guess what they did? Move the hell out of your way. They don't know today why, when those people walked out of those churches, they moved out of the way. Now you go back to what they did in the church,
Mhm.
you'll understand why when they walked out of those churches
Mhm.
to face those adversaries, they
Right.
moved out of the way. Because that we cannot have a Christian church and leave the African spiritual essence out, because then you don't have a Christian church, because this church was born in Africa. It was not born in Europe. It was stolen by Europe, right? Reconfigured by Europeans and handed back to us. But itself was not born in Europe. That's why I made the point earlier that the Ethiopian church, and it wasn't born in Ethiopia either, it was born in Turkey. But at the time it was born in Turkey, Turkey was still pretty much an African population. That's the Byzantine era. But he wasn't even born in Byzantium. First, you got to talk about Arius leaving the Nicene Conference, right? Going back to Egypt because he disagrees with where that emperor, whatever his name, wanted to take it. And he opens the first, what is today known as the Coptic, the Egyptian Coptic Church. Remember, in those days, they just were black folks. They were not Arab folks. They were not Turks and Eastern Europeans like today. But this becomes the earliest model that we could talk about. Now, some people call it St. Mark's opened a church, but St. Mark and them was all dead 100-something years before any of this doctrine was put together in this way. Arius is the closest you can get to anyone opening anything that resembles a Christian church. And that is what is evolving to the Coptic church. The second, the thing we call the Ethiopian church comes out of the Byzantine and Coptic church in Ethiopia. And so even in Sudan, though the Arabs and the Islam have destroyed most of them, 1,000 years before there's a Catholic church, you got cathedrals in the Sudan. They're just beginning to excavate some of them today. So that's why knowing this history will change, it'll give you a different way to teach the thing. You understand? So people can understand what you're teaching. And you can't ignore Egypt because of something but tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. That's crap. Somebody made up crap, right? You got to go and look and study Kemet. You got to study the Book of the Dead, so-called. You got to read the Hosea. You got to read the book of the pyramid text. You got to read the Debaka stone. These are all theological treaties thousands of years before the Bible, and they got all the same thing in the Bible in them.
Then you do trips to Egypt, don't you?
I don't like going there because a bunch of crazy white people there.
Oh, so it's changed.
But this year, I'd stopped going, but I'm going to go back this summer and then do 1 week in Egypt, 1 week in Ghana. That's the way I would split it. So you can see the old school, then see the new school.
Well, that's
But so there's some good literature, and you buy this book. It's called The Pyramid Text.
The Pyramid Text?
The Pyramid Text and the Book of the Dead. Now, it's hard reading at first, but once you take your time and then get the negative confessions, what they call the negative confessions, and you'll see all the 10th commandments already there. Right? And so you have to say something that's not being rebirth or being birth is being rebirth. Just like you're Generation X and I'm whatever generation. What do you call it? I'm the generation.
Civil rights, that's what I call it. Yeah.
But you're fighting the same struggle, but you have to rebirth new ideas, concepts, and principles to fight the struggle. Because some of the things we use, we can't use today. We can't use Dr. King and Malcolm today.
That's what I was going to say.
But you all got to come up with some new approaches to this thing.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? And that's why I wanted to have this conversation, because the first thing, and I think, me and Tanya talked on this many times. And the reason why I was so glad we could have the conversation with you and Tanya, because when I was putting together my conscious rap movement at the time, Tanya was the first one to bless me with an interview to help me get to,
No, keep talking. I'm just teasing Tanya. I'm saying, really?
Yeah. She gave me an interview to help me get the message out there. This was before I went into ministry. But we wanted to bring back the unity, because what we noticed, even in the conscious community, like we talk about the church, but we have to look at the conscious community, how much fighting is going on, how much arguing.
Stop calling them conscious. Call them the unconscious community. Because the conscious community would not be fighting each other.
Right.
That's why you don't see me on certain platforms, because I will not go on a platform where I'm fighting and debating anybody.
Well, thank you. We don't do that here. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, we promote positivity. But no, I thank you for saying that, because see, that our ignorance in that diminishes our efforts for progress.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I saw in studying the 60s history was that the first thing, the song by Curtis Mayfield called Darker Than Blue. Do you remember that, Professor Small?
Love Curtis. Yes, sir.
Right. It really made me think. And then when I looked at the history, I studied so much of what Malcolm did, what Martin did. And I said, that was one of the most violent times ever. We think now is violence, but you had straight up assassinations.
Mm-hmm.
And these people still found a way to come together. I'm not saying they didn't have little schisms here and there.
Oh, yeah. But unity was the key word. And, by the time Malcolm gets killed, him and Doc had already shake hands and they're working together. That's part of why he gets killed. Yeah. He was supposed to be down in Mississippi with Fannie Lou Hamer 2 weeks from the date that he was assassinated. They said, we can't let this Negro go down to Mississippi.
Yeah.
He had a big meeting, Ruby D, brother Tom, at his house in Queens. When Malcolm came from that last trip to Africa. Ruby and Ozzy, who was very close friends with them, set up the meeting at Tom's house, and every one of the civil rights organizations was there, the leaders. The only leader that wasn't there was Dr. King, because he had a prior thing, but he sent his rep. And all of them agreed that they were going to work together with Malcolm. And Malcolm was dead 2 weeks later. They said, we can't let that happen. There was other reasons for killing him so quickly. But that was one of the reasons. Yeah.
And they both put their religions to the side. They didn't argue about.
They didn't put their religion to the side. They didn't let the politics of religion get in their way. Because as you know, even as you approach it from a Christian perspective, there's all kinds of politics in Christianity that keeps, if the Black Christian community would unite, we'd rule the world.
Yes.
We'd rule the world.
Yeah, that's facts.
It's a billion plus of us, probably more, nearly 2 billion Black Christians in the world. Why can't we unite? Because we don't study history. History will erase the mystery.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Here's the problem with that. Where do we get the real history books? Because if you Google anything, you got to go 8 pages deep. Then if you go to the library, good luck with that. I mean, any Black history that I really know, I learned from like a 90-year-old who learned it from her mother.
No, there's a lot of literature out here. I'm sitting in my library right now, which is books on books. And that's not what's in my daughter's garage when we had to remodel. And I got more books there. I've given away at least 3 libraries in my life. We've got all kinds of male and female scholarships who have already answered the question. We just have to read them. We have to read Claude Anderson. He's laid out the economic piece for us. We have to read Dr. Wade Nobles. He's laid out the psychological piece for us. Akbar Muhammad. There's so much of the literature. Dr. Shashi McIntyre, long before our little sister dealt with it, wrote a piece called The Criminalization of the Race. She was one of my teachers. And she published that book, The Criminalization of a Race, where she, long before we were saying pipeline to prison, she had already outlined that this was coming because she had analyzed and studied the thing. So the work has been done. We don't even have to write another book. We need to read LaRon Bennett, Shaping of Black America.
LaRon Bennett?
LaRon Bennett. That book was, I still love reading that book over and over again. And his other book, Shaping of Black America. And then his masterpiece is The History of Black America. It's called Before the Mayflower. Get the revised edition. Classic stuff.
The history of
The history of Black America. And the title is Before the Mayflower by Dr. LaRon Bennett. This for an African American piece, if you want to look at a political analysis piece on the civil rights movement, it's called Plural but Equal. Plural but Equal by Dr. Harold Cruz. Right? Dr. Harold Cruz. He also wrote The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual, which you got to read, young brother. Because Harold already answered a lot of the questions you want to answer.
Yeah.
In those two books. And I'm looking on the shelf just to see what I think would be nice. And of course, anything by Cheikh Anta Diop, especially the cultural unity of Africa and his civilization and barbarism. So,
say the first name again, Cheikh.
Cheikh Anta, A-N-T-A, Diop, D-I-O-P. He's from Senegal. But his classical work is called Civilization or Barbarism. It's in English. And then the next one, he wrote multiple books. The next one is The Cultural Unity of Africa.
The cultural unity of Africa.
I got one more question for you, Professor. Well, first, let me thank you for.
One more book. Then I shut my mouth.
Okay.
When We Rule by Robin Walker. You know Robin in the UK. Yeah, Robin Walker. Okay. When We Rule. Because he covers 2,000 years of our history, and it's probably the best. You know, he goes to hundreds of other scholars to put this together. But he lives in the UK. I think he lives in London. When We Rule. Now, those books would be good, and then you can look at their bibliographies to formulate another bibliography. And maybe on the show, you can begin to give out an expanded bibliographies to your listeners of books which you examine first and see what the quality is. But I think the ones I just gave you are like good quality stuff.
Thank you. I noted them to the audience so that they can go look. So much. There's just so much. I wish we could have you for 5 hours.
Yeah, for real. Yeah, because
Richard, his spirit was so. I was like, wow, what would I do? Playing the lotto or something?
No, you was getting gas.
And everybody go like, "You, Professor Small," and he's just this kind young man, so courteous young man. I go like, when I got outside to the gas tank, I go like, "That's a nice young man." I'm actually gonna do his podcast.
He's always like that. He's always like that. True to character all the time. That's exactly how he is.
Yes. And I just want him to know that I appreciated him.
Oh yeah, thank you, man. Listen, it was an honor to meet you. I honor my elders. I cherish my elders. The trauma that I've encountered in my generation. I'm actually thankful for it, that God allowed it, because it taught me to cherish my elders, because I needed that wisdom to get me through.
That's a big part of being godlike. If you see behind me let me see if I can put my finger. Those are all my ancestors going back 200 years. You can't see all of them, but they're everywhere. So on this side, I got all my deities. I got Shango, I got Oya, I got Batala. And on this
you're
side,
a priest. You're a priest in Yoruba, right?
Huh?
You're a Yoruba priest, correct?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
And I had one more question for you. I thank you for bringing together the clarity of the Malcolm X and Martin Luther King philosophy. So, and I'm thankful for everybody that watched, so we can stop the debate, and look at what they both did for this generation today. If you
tell people to read them, if people would read their speeches, they would see those men didn't have the disunity that white press exaggerated.
Yes. Right. Exactly.
That's where we get caught up in that mess.
It was based on two things. The article in New York Times, the article in one major paper where he said something, and the quote was, I think it was Alex Haley, if I'm not, correct me if I'm wrong, misquoted what was really said, which made it a whole other context, which everyone ran with. That's really what happened. So
you remember when Dr. King was in the jail in Birmingham?
Yes.
Malcolm went to the South, and he told the white folks, "I would suggest you let him go, because you don't want me coming down." Dr. King was out the next morning. All right, he was out of jail. They said, "Oh hell," and Snick brought him down there, and he met with Dr. King's wife and some of the other leaders. And in his speech, he made it very clear, because his wife said, "Please don't get my husband killed now." Malcolm said, "No, I'm down here to help him," and he crafted this speech that let the white folks know, if you don't let Doc out of that jail, then I'm coming down here with some other people, and it ain't gonna be the same way, you know. That was the next morning.
Wow.
Right. And that's why knowing that go ahead. I'm sorry, Tanya.
No. I was just going to say in that whole piece of summary that they both brought so much to actually to the world, especially to us, but to the world. First of all, to take a group of people that were so downtrodden from all this slavery stuff and reprogrammed. Malcolm X, for me as a kid, made me say, I am beautiful. All right. And I know he wasn't the first to say that, but he's the one that reeled it in and made us say, wait a minute,
he had
like
the skill to make it plain, like he said.
Yeah, like Cassius Clay is another one who made me say, well, I am the best. Yeah, I'm the best. Because some people you just believe more than others. So that, and then Dr. King, the way he carried himself as well with grace and, you know, not a lot of voice tones going up and not a lot of whatever going on, but you know he means what he says. Those, they both brought something. We were able to vote because of King, because of Malcolm doing what he did. All of it worked together, in my opinion.
Right. I think when they talk about Dr. King and them in the early days, they only show us some of the fight on the courtroom steps and things like that. But they didn't tell how they walked into hundreds of different supermarkets.
Yes.
Pull all the basket of groceries, line them at the counter, and everybody walked out the store. And they had to put all that stuff back on the shelf.
See, I learned that from my mom. That's where I learned that from.
So people said, wait a minute. They just depopulated the shelves and everybody walked out the supermarket. You think they were going to call the sheriff and officer, y'all better do something. We can't survive like this.
Right, you know? Right. But I wanted to ask you this question, because I know you know the history. One of the brothers that I looked up to, Dick Gregory, he passed away. But he shed some light that I always said I want to ask Professor Smalls about this, because I didn't really get to see a lot of it. But he spoke to a brother named Pinto, or DePinto, who talked to Malcolm about bringing the issues of the treatment of Black folks to the national courts.
The United Nations.
The United Nations, yes, I'm sorry. Can you speak to that? I always wanted to learn more.
He was an official out of Kenya, I think Kenyan or Tanzania, Kenya. He was assassinated right after Malcolm, 2 weeks after Malcolm. And he was a diplomat, part of the diplomatic corps from this government in East Africa. And he was going to support Malcolm. What him and I think about 4 or 5 others was going to give Malcolm their time. You know, Paul Robeson and others had tried to come before the UN and raise the question of We Charge Genocide, which became the book. Well, Malcolm was going to, in another time, take that same argument to the United Nations, except with the dynamics that Malcolm's skills and ability and orator was going to allow. And as a Muslim, because the majority of people, non-white people in the UN are Muslim, and he was going to go before the General Assembly at a time in history where America and Russia and China is fighting to control the third world, right? And this is the period of time where the non-aligned nations are just becoming free like overnight, and everybody's trying to grab them. And they're going to come in and vilify America, and America's not going to be able to grab. They say, oh, hell, if this dude speaks at the UN, we're not going to get control of these African and Asian nations, because he's going to take us from being the super ethical, moral democracy we're lying about and show people the terrorist state that African people have to live in. The third incident, the unification with the civil rights movement, the speaking before the UN, because a number of people got killed over that. Mr. Cummings, who was the ambassador from Guyana, who was another one of his sponsors with Pinto, he got killed. They said he jumped out of a hotel window in New York 2 weeks later. About six of the brothers who was helping him got killed. We hear nothing about them, literally. But the third thing that is probably the most pressing, the non-aligned nation, 2 weeks hence of his assassination, was holding their conference in Algeria, being sponsored by the new president, Ahmed Ben Bella, who had led the Algerian Revolution against France. And the keynote speaker was to be Malcolm X and Che Guevara. Now that they didn't want to happen.
Okay.
And so that was the coup de grace. Those three situations was the coup de grace, especially him and Che addressing the non-aligned nation. That I consider to be more significant than him addressing the United Nations.
Wow. And man, I thank you for coming here and just shedding so much light on the history of the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and just to talk about unity and studying, because one of the most powerful things I saw in the civil rights era, right, that inspired me was when I saw Martin Luther King and Brother Coakley walk together. Even though they didn't see eye to eye on everything, but they still walked together. So that's one of the things that me and Tanya are working on, and having you here, Professor Smalls, really, really was a blessing, because you shed light on a lot of things, corrected us where we was wrong, which we appreciate. And
where unity is concerned, don't take no for an answer. Right. That's my point. And it doesn't matter what nobody think of you or say about you. Unity is absolutely essential.
Right.
And just to be, unity is one of the key aspects of being godly. And so when we study, we see, wow, there's something about this. Because you're talking about, at the most basic level, people's ability to supply food, clothing, shelter, and safety for themselves and their families. That's what we're fighting about. If people could eat, if people could provide shelter, if people could provide security place, they wouldn't need none of this other crazy stuff. But someone has denied us aspect, created this impoverished world where we now have to be like rats in a barrel, eating off of each other, scavenging one another to survive out of necessity and fear and torment.
Yes.
So we're saying, no, we don't want to do this anymore. We want to find a way to provide food, clothing, shelter, and safety for every human being in the world. And that means, like Malcolm X says, we got to control the economics, the politics, and the culture where we live.
Yes.
Every communities around the world. To do that, we have to get control of the land, the labor, and resources where we live. To do that, we've got to get control of the political apparatus where we live, and go back to Dr. King and him and the voter rights struggle.
Now, how do we do that part? Because politics today and voting today seems to me be
no, voting is still good. You're confusing the voting process with the criminals that we vote in office. We got to get better people to run.
Well, that's what I'm saying. The people we're getting choices of is like, what's the choice?
Yeah, the choice has to be what you make it. And what we're doing, we're not making the choice. We're letting somebody else making the choice, and we're going and voting for the lesser two evils, they call it. No.
Right.
Let's run Tanya for office. Let's run Richard for office.
Right, which is how everybody else does it.
But we got to do the political education to learn how the apparatus works. Right. So we can use the apparatus to our advantage.
Yeah.
Any other call to action for us, for everybody who can really create change?
I'll take the Christian term: love ye one another, that ye may also be loved. That sounds like a very simple term, but when you find and love the God in you, it's easy to find and love the God in somebody else. That's a very African way of being.
Exactly, and
there's also a scripture that says, "If we bite and devour one another, how shall we stand?" So that's when Paul was addressing the infighting that was going on in the churches, and the Bible also speaks on not agreeing with evil.
Now, so let me tell you something that I'm gonna hit you with right now before I let you go. Move away from old aimless he, they, and thou, and modernize that shit and make it simple. That's why Malcolm and King was so effective. They spoke about yesterday in the acronym of now. Right? He interpreted that Bible. Malcolm interpreted that Quran. So it's simple, plain, basic. Because I told you the truth is all there. It's in the book. But people get to worshiping the concept of the book without even reading the damn book. They'll say the Bible. What have you read in it? And most people can't tell you anything.
God is love.
Right? Yeah, they know the few little cliches, right? But no, let's get serious about studying. If you think the literature isn't worth anything, let's study it for a while and see whether there's any value in it. If there's no value, then we throw it away. But I know if you study it, you'll see the value. You can do that for any of the books. Sometimes there's a book I read that's on the shelf that's called The Threefold Lotus Sutra.
Mm.
That's 3 of the earliest sutras of Buddha.
Mhm.
When you study it, it looks like anything Yoruba, anything Akan, anything Congo, anything Christian. But if you don't do this kind of reading, you'll never see the similarity. There's only one God. It doesn't give a damn what we call it.
Mhm.
Okay? There's only one law of God that governs this universe, the cosmology, the ecology. You don't care what book you write it in. You can't change the law.
Mm.
There's no multiple gods if they haven't discussion of which one of us are God. That's us having a silly, childish discussion. You know. And if I speak English, the word for the divine in English is God. People say, "Oh, that ain't the name." And there ain't none of them the name. Allah ain't the name. Oludumare isn't the name. Oludumare is the name in Yoruba. Allah is the name in Arabic. God is the name in English. So stop getting caught up in that little crazy. What we're trying to do is make reference to causation and sustaining whatever that force is. We all give it a name, but we know if somebody removed that sun, we all die.
That's right.
We shouldn't have to use it as a symbol.
Somebody's trying to remove it. I'll just say musky. I'll say musky.
We don't get water, we're gonna die. Somebody cut off the oxygen, we're gonna die.
They're prepared.
So when you study African tradition, and you'll eventually see the same thing in the Bible if you study deep enough, they see God as the totality of everything, including you, being an aspect of that totality.
Right.
And I like the way the Ewe put it, they call it Sobe Lisa, that God is the totality of creation and all that is created. And in that book I told you about the pyramid text, I'm going to recite to you just a short piece. This is their Genesis story. It says, God, what they call God, as Adamson says, I created myself out of myself. I caused existence to exist so that existing might exist. And when I found myself in existence, the feminine principle of Ma'at was at my side. God didn't create the woman came with God. And so it gets even deeper. I spat out Shu and I cough up Tefnut, the air and the moisture and so forth. I created Geb, I created what we call the heavens and the earth. It's all written there 35,000 years earlier. There's only one truth in the universe. Anything else is somebody's variation on the truth.
Well,
once we're clear on that, we try to get as close to explaining that truth as possible in the simplest way as possible to the masses of people so that it is usable under the circumstances they find themselves. Then you don't have to convert nobody. They be trying to convert you. They be saying, I'm with you, let's roll. I want to eat. I want to put some food on the table. I need some shelter over my head. I need some space to protect my babies. You know what I'm saying? Because that's what we're talking about. Security.
Right. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Professor. I know you're currently working on 2 books. I think
I've been working on them books for years. I don't get time to speak, but I have all the writings.
Yeah, finish them. They look so good. Collection of what's this? A collection of lectures from Malcom X. Yeah, and post-slavery trauma syndrome. Oh, that looks. That's the book I need to read.
I coined that term back in 1992. Right?
Wow.
Everybody will run with it, but they miss the point. See, if you don't go back to Africa and see the African man and woman before any European contamination, you don't know what the trauma is.
Ooh, that's powerful.
You keep trying to fix stuff, but you fix it. What you're trying to do is take fragmented, broken stuff and try to create something that you don't even know what it looked like before it got fragmented and broken. You got to go back and see what it looked like before it got fragmented and broken so you can reassemble it in its correct manner. And so that means we got to study ancient literature, ancient African history. Something as simple as why Africans created polygamy. It was African women that created polygamy. And it wasn't universal. Most African countries and most African culture, monogamy was the order of the day, not polygamy. Polygamy was the exception out of necessity, because even today, for every 1 male child, you have 2 to 3 female children being born. the African says, what do we do about this? How are these other women, the excess women, going to have the opportunity to have a family like all other women? And so this is those men who are capable of taking care of those women, meaning you can't have them all in your bedroom. You had to buy each one of you, had to build each one of them a home.
Right.
And then there was a relationship work on how you treat them. What Europe did was turn its surplus women into prostitutes and whores. That's not what Africa did.
Right.
Africa gave them families and a structure for the family to function. Something as simple as that. It may not make no sense when you don't think about it. But when you think about what one society did for that population and what another society did with that same population, you begin to see the ethical, moral principles at the foundation of those societies.
Wow. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Doc. This has been amazing and so much we know now. I mean, I've been only as far as Morocco. I want to go to Ghana one day. I want to go to quite a few different other places.
You got to hang out with me in Ghana if you want to really see Ghana.
Okay, I will keep you up on that. I'm trying to get there in the next couple of years. That's my goal.
Okay.
Goal. Yeah.
I'll ask the ancestors to keep me around for a couple of years longer.
Yes, please, ancestors.
Me,
please,
you, and Richard. And I'll show y'all my Ghana. You know, I have a hotel, me and my friends there for the last 18 years in Cape Coast. And it's really my second home, you know.
Okay.
Wow. Well, thank you.
So that's good. Yeah. You know, I tell my wife that I know she'll be excited.
We're going to hang out. It's just so, all the African countries I've been to, there's a humanity there that you don't find in non-African nations. Whether it's Togo, whether it's Benin, whether it's Senegal, whether it's Ghana, whether it's Ethiopia, Uganda, there's a thing there. I call it the God factor that's in the character of the people. Even though they may not speak your language, know your name, when we come together, that God factor kicks in and forms the relationship. Right, and I don't find that among other people.
Thank you.
Wow, that's beautiful. You don't know how excited I am just to, have this dialogue. And I appreciate the sacrifices you made just to be here, Professor Smalls. And I learned so much more. You know, I'm amazed that you and Brother Ahmed was connected. And I mean, I could go on and on. You know how it is when a young brother's excited when he meets a great teacher and he don't even know everything he's trying to say. That's what you're seeing right now, Professor. So
I'm blessed to meet you, because when my eyes close, I see you and Tanya, you young people, and I never had any issue. I always know the next generation gonna take it to the next level. I ain't never had no issue with that. But some people think that the last generation was so. No, you're greater than us because you're the next step on a journey. There's a step that comes after the last step. You're the next step. And this generation that you all represent is the greatest we've ever produced. You're the most skilled, you're the most learned, you're the most diverse. And yes, the forces against you are going to be more harsh than the forces that was against me. But you'll persevere because you got what it takes to do it.
Give me 1 second.
Wow. Wow.
Sorry for that. Yeah, I apologize for the freeze there, guys. But thank you for that beautiful compliment that you have faith in us. And I'm one of those people, you have all your ancestors back there. I'm one of those people that hold my ancestors dear to my heart. And I always, that's how I made it, through all my life as a foster kid. It was somebody who paved the way for me. So there's no way I can just lay down and be like, okay, I just give up. There's just no way. So I appreciate that, because I teach other young foster youth and other youth the same thing. If you don't think about yourself, it's not about you. Think about the fact that somebody's got to come after you. And when you think that way, you're going to lay a little cement down, a little pavement, just a little piece at a time. You don't have to do no big thing. One little thing that you can do as a human being, that's it. That's all we ask for. You don't got to say more. Not everybody's going to be a Malcolm or a Dr. King.
They came to do what they came to do.
Yes.
I always they teach us in all the African traditions that everybody leaves heaven with an assignment. Learn what your assignment is and do the best job you can.
Oh, we're gonna end on that. That's the best one I've ever heard. Everybody has an assignment. Do what you can. Wow, I like that a lot. That should be a T-shirt.
I like that too.
Yeah.
Should be a t-shirt.
My
Hold that
pleasure.
thought.
Yeah. That's that. You know what? That's your new T-shirt, Professor Smalls.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm
market
loving
that. Market that, man. You
Yeah,
heard that.
that's
You heard that from
powerful.
Professor Smalls first.
Yes. Thank you, all of Professor Small's
Mhm.
students out there. I appreciate you too for watching the show today. Please share, everybody. My viewers, thank you very much. Rich viewers, thank you for watching. And more importantly, I hope that you take what he said to heart. And there was many jewels in there. I hope you got at least one of them. So we appreciate you, Dr. Dr. Small. I say doctor because I know you have that, but you said Professor Smalls.
Yeah, I would even prefer Brother Small, but the professor is
Brother?
called me, so I live with the professor. But
Okay.
remember, closing, Dr. Asa Hilliard gave us this one. He said, true freedom is to be shackled to your African identity. True freedom is to be shackled to your African identity.
I get that. I totally get that. Because once you're comfortable in yourself, nothing can really move you left and right and emotional and all that stuff. You understand where you come from, which is why I believe a lot of my African friends have a different level of inner confidence than some of my African American friends, in a sense, in a little tiny sense.
You're absolutely right. That's the reason.
Yeah, they could be poor, they could be whatever, but they come in with the grandma raised them, auntie, the village, everybody was involved. So they're not like, oh, poor is me. They're
But
like,
see,
let's go get 'em.
many of us are raised in the same way, but we're in a larger society to tell us that was poverty.
Right.
We're in a larger society to tell us that's a broken home.
Right.
What's broken about it? Grandma wasn't broken.
Right.
You know? And so they define our experience so negatively, we don't want to celebrate it. You understand? Whereas those kids that come from Africa and other places, they're still celebrating in their mind that experience because that gives them the inner strength and confidence to go forward.
Right, exactly.
So the enemy is over here. Understand, I got to break that or they'll outdo us. And we have to find a way to tell our people to cherish that, honor that, revere that, and celebrate that.
Well, thank you. Wow, celebrate. So know who you are. Most important lesson. That's the most important thing I could say today. Know who you are. That's everything. Study your history, know your history, and make sure your kids know your history. Very important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Very important.
I
So
talk to my
whatever they're
children.
taught in school gets bypassed. Write it down on paper, pass the test, and keep it moving. You have to learn also, I believe, what any enemy knows. I want to know too, because then I can better defense.
All of my children, we have an ancestor shrine in our home. Now, most African Americans have an ancestor shrine in their home, but they don't know it. They call it the mantle, right?
Right.
The table, but they only have the dead people's pictures on it, right? So all we have to do is like jazz it up a little bit, put a white cloth under the dead people's pictures, put a glass of water that we refresh every day, all right? Take a little bell and ring it and talk to them in the morning so you can remind yourself of the beauty that they represented when they was alive, and you back in Africa.
Yes.
But we do it. We just don't acknowledge that we do it. We don't tell nobody why we got all those dead people's pictures on that mantle. That's an ancestor.
I have mine with my brother.
Yeah, that's the ancestral altar. But we're afraid now to call it what it is. You know? And once a year, the family should come together and say, we're going to have dinner today. We're going to celebrate our ancestors' day in our household.
Right.
That's what I would call.
Great auntie said this. Grandma used to say this. Grandpa said this. And laugh about them.
Right.
That's
I do that on Thanksgiving.
That shackling comes into place right there.
I do that on Thanksgiving. I don't celebrate the traditional whatever they call that because I'm like, how can I
pick another day? I fight with my family too. They force me to suffer through this damn Thanksgiving.
Well, no, because everybody keeps saying, oh, I don't celebrate at all.
Most people, most people do it as a way of being with family. It's an opportunity to be with family and to give thanks to God. And I got that. Most of them don't do it for no pilgrims or none of that stuff. I got that. Right. But I'm saying for the sanctity, pick another day for ancestry.
Okay.
You know?
I'm going to do
But
that.
that's their day. That's
Okay.
their Sunday.
Any day but that.
Any Sunday, any Saturday, we pick in the 52 Sundays and Saturdays we have every year.
Thank you. Thank you so much,
And
Professor.
you can't go wrong because we celebrate Christmas on the 25th of December, right?
That's right.
Yet it was in the 6th month, it was in June when God told Mary you're pregnant. So that means Jesus couldn't have been born before March. But we ain't gonna mess with that, Reverend.
Nope. Well, thank
We
you
just
so
need to
much.
get it right, get it right.
Yeah.
Right.
Teach the truth. Know the truth. The truth will set you free.
Set you free.
Truth alone will set you free.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you.
I appreciate y'all. So I'm gonna go join my wife.
Yes.
Sitting downstairs by herself all afternoon.
Oh, please tell her we said thank you for lending you to us.
I will. And it was
I'll
a beautiful opportunity to meet both of you, and I'll come back again. And if you need me to help you find other scholars that you want to bring to the platform, just call me, and we'll find out who we can bring in for you.
Okay,
yeah, I definitely want to. We definitely want to have you and Umar on the panel.
That'd be wonderful. Omar's one of the brilliant, powerful young minds in the world today.
Right.
He's doing good work, a good job.
Yeah. And I'm gonna send you that song that I told you I did. Tanya likes the song actually, but I want your feedback too.
Okay, that'll be good.
So
I'm sure Sister Tanya likes it. I like it. So it must be good.
The Black Queen likes
light and love your way, and please tell the missus thank you so much for letting us, because we went way over, but it was just like, how do you not take advantage of
we had to let you speak, Professor. We needed that.
No, but thanks, because I talk a lot when I start talking. So
that's good though. That's good.
As you can see, we got me to be quiet. That's a miracle, and that's a great thing.
But I enjoyed myself, and we'll do this again.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so peace and blessings to you.
Yes,
peace and blessings. I'm tongue twisted right now. Peace and blessings, Professor.
Yes, my dear.
We appreciate you.
God bless you, brother.
God bless you.
Bye.